Hasner, can you answer a few questions for me?
Well, we gotta go inside right now.
Do you know where you stand on the 2012 Ryan budget?
Can we do this inside? Come on in. Seriously, come on in.
Okay, sure.
You can stand in the back.
Okay.
How are you doing today?
I'm fantastic.
Good. What's your name?
Jesse.
Jesse. Adam Hasner.
Nice to meet you.
Who do you work for?
The D-Trick.
The what?
The Democratic Party.
D-Triple-C. Cool. Welcome. Do you live down here?
I do.
Awesome. I guess we'll be seeing a lot of you.
I guess so. It's nice to meet you.
This is Janelle.
Nice to meet you.
Pleasure.
That's Brad.
I'm good.
Well, it is so great to be with you guys tonight, and thank you so much for the opportunity to come out here. I had the opportunity to meet several of these other candidates, and I know what they're currently experiencing right now with the unknowns about their district boundaries and where they're going to be campaigning and who's going to be voting for them. And so let me just bring you up to speed as it relates to the 22nd Congressional District. Because there's been a lot going on over the past few weeks. Many of you know that Congressman Tom Rooney recently announced that he was going to seek re-election in a congressional district that begins in Okeechobee and goes west all the way across the state to the Gulf of Mexico, Charlotte County area. And it was at that time when Congressman Allen West announced that he was going to seek re-election in the Treasure Coast area, northern Palm Beach County, Martin County, St. Lucie County. And so it was about 6 weeks ago that I announced that I was going to be a candidate for United States House of Representatives in District 22. I have to tell you, it has been like drinking water out of a fire hose every single day since. But we are off to a great start. I can tell you one of the more exciting moments of the campaign was when that evening Allen West called and said that he was going to endorse me to be his successor in the United States House of Representatives. And all of you know Allen West. He does not throw his endorsement around very lightly. And so we are very proud to have his support. And then over the past few weeks, as we've been building that momentum throughout the Palm Beach and Broward County region, we were proud to be able to be the first candidate in the country that has the endorsement of both Marco Rubio and Jeb Bush. This is an exciting time because we recognize that one of the three important goals that we have in November is to retain the majority in the United States House, to take back the majority in the United States Senate, and to make Barack Obama a one-term president. District 22 is going to be a tough battleground seat. I think probably one of the 25 battleground seats in the entire country. It runs from downtown West Palm Beach along the coast down to downtown Fort Lauderdale. It comes inland in a couple of places west of I-95, but only in areas like Delray Beach and Boca Raton, and then out in Plantation as well. And one thing I can tell you, I served in the state legislature for 8 years, and I had the honor of being not just the representative for District 87, the coastal communities from Lantana down to Deerfield Beach, but to also serve as the majority leader of the Florida House of Representatives. Actually, when Marco Rubio was the Speaker of the Florida House of Representatives, he selected me to serve as his Republican majority leader. And so we were fighting even back then for a conservative agenda when many were saying that the reason why Republicans lost in 2006 was because we abandoned, or was because we were too conservative. I was somebody who believed that it was because we abandoned our principles. And I think we realize that the problems that we face in Washington today weren't just created by the Democrats. I think we need to recognize that the Bush administration and the Republicans in Washington ran up $5 trillion in debt over those 8 years. Now, what the Obama administration has done in 3.5 years of racking up $5 trillion in debt should have us very concerned, because we are on an unsustainable path.
That's right.
And that is why this is such a critical election year. I believe a tipping point election year, and why this race is so critically important as part of that goal of maintaining the majority in the United States House of Representatives. But not just about winning elections, but about governing based on those principles. And so every single day we're going to be out throughout these communities in Palm Beach and Broward County sharing our message about what we need to do in Washington, D.C. because I think we all recognize that Washington is broken. And as I said, it's not just Democrats. Republicans share in the blame. And when you look at what's taking place in Washington and you realize, and one thing I think just illustrates it more than anything, is this insider trading scandal. And the fact that we have members of Congress on both sides of the aisle who are personally profiting on our taxpayer dime with information that if you or I had it and made those types of transactions, we would be thrown in jail. And you start to realize what's going on, the pay increases and the pensions that are out of line with the private sector. The fact is that we haven't had a budget in Washington for the past 3 years. Not having a balanced budget. We haven't had a budget for the past 3 years. Anybody who's in business or for your own personal household, if you didn't have a budget, you'd be out of business. And the reality of it is that we have people in Washington who right now don't think that the federal government needs to appropriately prioritize our spending. Well, something that I support and something that I hope you will join in the movement is something called the Budget or Bust Act, which says this very simply. If the United States Congress does not pass a budget for the fiscal year, members of Congress don't get paid. I know a little bit about this. One of the biggest disconnects is that we have elected representatives, whether in Washington or Tallahassee, who aren't living by the same set of rules as everybody else. That's one of the key fundamental problems that we're facing right now in our country. When I served in the state legislature, and it certainly didn't make me popular, I led the effort to cut our own legislative salaries when we had to be able to balance the budget and reduce spending by 10%. I led the effort to cut legislators' pay by 10%. Wasn't alone the only solution to solving the budget crisis in Tallahassee, but it was about leading by example. And that's the same type of leadership that I'm going to take to Washington, D.C. as the next United States House of Representatives member from Palm Beach and Broward County. And so let me just take a few more minutes. Let me take a few more minutes to be able to talk to you about what I think is really at stake here in this election. And I think one thing that Arthur didn't mention about my background, though some of you may know, and I really appreciate that introduction, Colonel. Thank you so much thank you so much for your service to our country, and also for all the veterans and military families in this room who have served and who continue to serve. But let me just share with you, because I grew up here in Palm Beach County, and I was sharing with you earlier about the 8 years I served in the State House of Representatives, and 95% of the district that I represented for those 8 years are contained within the new congressional boundaries of District 22, which comprises about 20% of this new congressional district. And so we're off to a great start. But one of the things that Arthur didn't mention is that I'm the son of two liberal Jewish Democrats who was born in Brooklyn, New York. And my family moved here at the age when I was 7 years old. Actually, my parents were both public school teachers. And they had $31 to their name when I was born. And after a few years of continuing to teach in the New York City public school system, my father decided to move to Florida to pursue business opportunities with his family and the family business. And they made sacrifices. They did certain things that provided me with opportunities that I've had throughout my life. And I know each and every one of you, whenever I get to share these stories, that's what's at stake in this election. Because this is the first time in generations where people are starting to look and think that their children or their grandchildren may not have the same opportunities for prosperity that they've had. That's why this is such a critical election. I had a few minutes to walk around the room and meet Sydney. And she's here tonight, and everyone get a chance to say hi to Sydney. But when you think about the sacrifices that generations have made in order to be able to allow their children and grandchildren to have those opportunities, That's why we're fighting so hard to put our country back on the right track. And one thing I can tell you, and I get to speak to a lot of different groups around the communities that I intend to represent, and regardless of your political affiliation, whether you're a conservative Republican or a liberal Democrat or somewhere in between, we all share something in common. And that is that we all hope that future generations will be able to surpass, in terms of accomplishments, the things that we've been able to do. It's why families sacrifice the way that they do in order for their children to be able to pursue those opportunities. I know that I was able to do it because of my parents. I know many of you were able to do it because of your families and the sacrifices that they made. But now when we look at what's happening here in this country, we realize that we have a $16 trillion national debt that is unsustainable. And as I talked earlier about both parties being to blame, the fact of the matter is that President Obama has proposed budgets over the course of the next 10 years that will double our national debt, actually to a point of being $24 trillion, which will be more than the overall size of America's economy. That is stifling economic growth today, and it will have devastating impacts on the future. It's why I'm a big supporter of a meaningful, balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution, because we have to live within our means. We can't continue to spend $1 trillion more a year than what we're bringing in tax revenue. We recognize also, too, that our entitlement programs are unsustainable. That's right. Medicare is on a path toward insolvency. And there are some who are going to use scare tactics and who are going to use fear. And they're going to show commercials of people pushing Granny off of a cliff. Well, let me tell you something. There are solutions to addressing these problems. The Wyden-Ryan plan, which is a bipartisan plan in Washington, D.C., which addresses the problems of Medicare, which says we are going to protect and preserve Medicare for those who are currently on it and for those who are nearing eligibility. But as I get to talk to some of these young Republican groups, and I ask them the question, how many of you believe that Medicare or Social Security is going to be there for you when you become age eligible? Not a single hand goes up. We need to modernize Medicare and other entitlement programs so that we can continue to have that form of a safety net going forward in the future. It's the status quo and the politicians that are advocating for the status quo that is going to bankrupt programs like Medicare that over 3 million Floridians depend upon. That's why this is such an important election. That's why we're going to see so many of the stark contrast and differences between the candidates, whether it's in the Congressional District 22 or whether it's for President of the United States. Because we understand that we can't keep going in the same direction, that we have to get Washington's out-of-control spending under control, that we have to reform Medicare and Social Security and entitlement programs, that we have to pass a balanced budget amendment to the U.S. Constitution. But we're not going to do this by spending cuts alone. We have to grow our economy. And right now, our tax structure and the job-killing regulations are stifling economic growth and job creation. We have a corporate tax structure right now that in less than a month, America will have the highest corporate tax rate in the industrialized economy. It's why companies like Apple, just the other day, announced that they're not bringing back profits from overseas back to the United States because of our taxes. We need to fundamentally transform our tax system to make it more competitive. Not just our corporate taxes, but our individual tax system as well. Because everyone understands that not all business owners file as corporations under the C designation in the tax code. Many file personally under the S chapter. And so it is critical that we are able to have those types of reforms so that we can lower rates, broaden the base, eliminate loopholes and exemptions and the corporate favoritism and all of the goodies that the lobbyists put into the tax code. We'll make it more fair. We'll make it simpler. We'll make it flatter. And at that same time, what we've seen time and time again, more money will actually end up coming into the federal treasury because of the economic activity. Another part of that equation of getting our economy going again is having common sense regulations for the 21st century. Right now, we have the types of regulations that are killing production, the uncertainty of what business owners are going to have to face in the out years. We need to be able to peel back the regulations that are stifling economic growth, but make sure that we have the protections in there that are necessary. But it begins with things like Obamacare, which I can tell you right now, and you saw probably just recently, the CBO has just produced new cost estimates, which says that it's going to be 2 times more expensive than what was originally estimated. And why is that? Because the Democrats played accounting games and tricks by putting the start date in January of 2014, and so the first 10 years weren't actually a full accounting of what it was going to cost. My belief is that it's going to cost even more than what the CBO is currently suggesting. And so in so many ways, Obamacare is falling short. It needs to be repealed, and then it needs to be replaced with common sense, free market reforms that are going to allow people to have access to higher quality health care at more affordable rates. And it can be done. From there, we need to make sure that we have an American energy security policy in this country. And I know many of you may have heard the news today that President Obama has now agreed to allow to go forward half of the Keystone Pipeline. So I guess half is better than none, but I guess we'll learn some of the details going forward. But the fact of the matter is that we have $4 a gallon gas prices. And it was $4.06 down on Yamato Road when I drove by this morning. And I can tell you that we have an energy secretary, in Secretary Chu, who said that it's not the government's responsibility to try to bring down gas prices. And his prior statements were that he thought we should have gas prices of $6 or $7 or $8 a gallon because it would send people away from using fossil fuels and using oil. Well, guess what? There's another way to affect gas prices other than just lowering demand. That's increasing supply.
That's right.
And so we should be able to have a domestic energy policy for more oil and natural gas production onshore and offshore, here domestically, whether it's in the Gulf, whether it's in Anwar, or whether it's being able to use all of those new technologies and the resources that we have in the heartland of this country. Because everybody understands that our hundreds of billions of dollars in our trade deficits that we send to foreign countries that don't like us very much is making us a weaker country. Just like our national debt, which I believe has become America's greatest national security threat. Our energy dependence on these countries is actually jeopardizing America's sovereignty. Because if we continue to borrow 40 cents of every dollar, and borrow it from countries that don't share our values and interests, and if we continue to send money overseas to countries that want to destroy our way of life, then we can't act in our own best interests. And we're seeing it now more and more every single day, with our enemies more emboldened than ever on the global stage. Russia and China, and yes, certainly Iran, as they continue to approach having the capability of producing a nuclear weapon. And this administration has been the most hostile to our greatest ally in that region, which I think faces the first threat from a nuclear Iran, and that is the state of Israel.
Right.
And we need a national security policy. We need a national security policy coming out of the White House and out of Congress that is based on one very simple solution: peace through strength.
That's right.
And it is critical for us to be able to stand with our greatest ally, the state of Israel, shoulder to shoulder. And when you say, "I've got your back," it means I've got your back. Now, over the course of the next 7.5 months, you are going to hear, I believe, 2 very different visions for the future of this country from the candidates running for Congressional District 22. Many of you know that Lois Frankel, the former mayor of West Palm Beach, is one of the Democratic candidates, and Kristen Jacobs, who's a Broward County commissioner, is the other. I would tell you that they are opposite sides of the same coin. They believe in more government spending and more deficits and more dependency. They believe in higher taxes and penalizing punitive taxes to penalize job creators. They believe in those job-stifling regulations. They don't believe in an American energy security policy that's good for our economy and good for America's national security. And so we're going to be on offense. We're going to be relentless every single day talking about the math, because that's really what it boils down to. It boils down simply to 16, 8, and 4. A $16 trillion deficit that not only that not only are we leaving to our kids as it continues to grow, but that debt that is forcing out investment in the private sector and that is killing our ability to create jobs today. That 8% unemployment that is, I believe, way underreported, but that 8% unemployment, which is unacceptable in this country, that we now need to turn around. I remember when President Obama and the Democrats passed the stimulus and told us that unemployment was going to go down below 8%. And yes, that $4 a gallon gas price, some are even projecting this summer that it'll go to $5 or $6. That's something that we can't afford as a country or as individuals or as businesses. And so let me conclude by telling you this. I shared with you earlier that my mom was a liberal Jewish Democrat. And somebody asked me the other day, well, I'll say this, when I turned 18 and registered as a Republican, I don't think she was very happy that day. But that day, well, that day only pales in comparison to the day that I graduated from law school and told her I was never going to be a lawyer. You know Jewish moms. But somebody asked me the other day, they said, why would we support somebody for Congress who wouldn't even listen to their own mother? And my response was very simply this: because I'm willing to go against the grain. I'm willing to stand up even when it's not popular. I'm willing to say the tough things and do the tough things. That's why this is such a critical election. We need people who aren't worried about political consequences, but who are more concerned about what are the consequences to America going to be if we fail to take bold action to put America back on the right course and alter the trajectory of this country. Because when you look back in American history, when you look back at our nation's founding, when you look at the Civil War, when you look at World War II, each and every one of those times, a generation rose to the challenge. And I believe this is yet another opportunity for us to answer the call. And so that's what I'm asking each and every one of you to be a part of. Ronald Reagan in 1980, as we were winding down those 4 years of Jimmy Carter, he asked the American people one very simple question. He said, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? That was an important question back then. The question I'm asking today, the question I hope each and every one of you will join me in asking between now and November, is where do we want America to be 5 years from now? Because that window of opportunity is narrowing. Time is running short for us to be able to tackle these problems. The ideas and the solutions exist. We need to be aggressive. We need to be on offense. We need to articulate our vision for limited government, for free markets, for individual freedom, for a strong America national security. Because Sydney's future is at stake. Thank you all so much. God bless you. God bless you.
He's going to take some questions. Just a couple of you have. I will come over to you with the mic. Any questions? Aaron.
Did you get your mom to change to Republican?
Sure. The question, I'll answer or repeat the question. The question was whether or not my mom has now become a Republican. Well, let me back it up just a little bit because we have a friend here tonight. And I will share with you, because some of you may have read about it in the Palm Beach Post. So it's public information. You don't read the Palm Beach Post, okay. So let me bring you up to speed. My mom was Lois Frankel's first campaign manager and legislative assistant. So when she was interviewed recently, my mom, I'm very proud to say that she said that she supports my decision to run for Congress and she supports me in this election. So I'm proud of her.
I think you guys have big voices. Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, hi, I'm Evan Gussack. I had written you a little while back, and one of the concerns from a national security point of view is the growing threat of the Sino-Russian axis, and it's not only through the debts, it's also through the relocation of manufacturing, not only through internal government policies, but also unfair trade practices and very aggressive lobbying by the left, as well as multinational corporations that historically have traded and dealt with totalitarians. Will you stand up to that lobby, if you will, and vote for legislation like the currency reform for fair trade bill that's been in the U.S. Congress since, I believe, 2008 or 2009? Thank you.
So a great question about trade policy and certainly as it relates to, I think, jobs relocating overseas. And I think a lot of that is due to the fact that we have, as I talked earlier briefly about, tax policy and regulatory policy that drives our jobs overseas. I think the other thing, though, that we need to be able to do, and I talked about this briefly too, is that we can turn our attention to China and elsewhere and blame them for currency manipulation as well as for certain of their internal policies that impact their ability to attract jobs. But one thing that I think we can't get in the habit of is pointing our fingers elsewhere and saying that the reason why the problems we have are because of others. I think we need to take a very strong look in the mirror, and when it comes to fiscal policy and monetary policy, be able to address the fact that we have unsustainable deficits and debt, and more so that we have a threat, and actually we've seen it, so it's beyond the threat, of a devalued currency. And I think that, to me, is something that if we can get that under control, then I think we can act from a stronger position as it relates to policies vis-a-vis China and Russia and elsewhere. And so before I begin that process of going out and attacking some of these other situations, I want to make sure we get our own fiscal house in order. And one last question. Yes, sir. Don, you know me well enough.
Yeah, one question that's Mr. Paul has been hammering on, and that's the Fed. You talked about the devaluation of our dollar. Congress is the only body that has the responsibility in the Constitution to control the money supply, basically, and to do coinage. And yet they seem to have abdicated that and given it to the Fed, which is really not controlled by the U.S. government at all. And the Fed's the ones printing all this money. So what would you do about that?
Well, I think what we've seen in recent years, and there's been a big movement, I think it's been bipartisan as well, which is to have stronger oversight and an auditing of the Federal Reserve. And I think that that's something that many people are now being enlightened to in terms of monetary policy in this country. And I'll just conclude with this, because we did see it in the 1970s, and we understand it, that the most insidious tax out there is inflation. Inflation will zap your net worth overnight. And I'm not just telling you something in theory. Other countries have seen it happen. And I think what we need to understand is, as a nation, and fiscal policy and monetary policy is that we need to learn these lessons from history. What I'm afraid of, whether it's on the economic side or whether it's on the national security side, especially as it relates to Iran and the threats from Iran, is that the only thing we seem to learn from history is that we don't learn from history. And that's what I think concerns me the most. And so that's why I think we need to be aggressive in terms of overhauling our tax code, in terms of fiscal policy, in terms of spending, as well as in terms of monetary policy to prevent the further devaluation of our currency, which I think has a huge impact on the question that you asked as well. So let me just, again, thank each and every one of you for coming out tonight. Let me thank each and every one of you for all of the work that you are going to be a part of between now and November. I know, just like all the other candidates, I have a petition on the table. If you can get a moment to sign it, we greatly appreciate it. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. AdamHasner.com is our website. Sign up to volunteer for our campaign. We're doing already grassroots walks and door-to-door walks. I know Arthur kidded about my first campaign, going to 10,000 homes door-to-door on my Vespa back in 2002. Well, I already started again last weekend, walking door-to-door, and actually had a few people that asked me where the Vespa was. So some people just don't forget. But I will tell you, this is a tipping point election. This is a critical time in our nation's history. And by you being here tonight is a great first sign. But over the course of the next 7 months, every single one of us needs to go out and find 5 or 10 others, email 5 or 10 others to get the message out. I know there's a lot of folks here who are active with the party, Mike and others, and Janine, let me just compliment you on the growth in this club and just applaud you just to continue to build this as people get more engaged and in tune with the campaign. And let me just say, I'm sure I'm going to see all of you many times between now and November, and I look forward to election night in November when we do take back the United States Senate, when we keep the majority in the United States House, and together we make Barack Obama a one-term president. Thank you all so much.